Good day, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of our Secretariat and Implementation Council, we welcome you to the launch of the second annual update from the Global Commission on Evidence to Address Societal Challenges. The Global Evidence Commission is a grassroots effort that really aims to improve the use of research evidence in routine times and also global crises. Building momentum, that's the theme of our update 2024. I'm Jen Thornhill-Verma. I'm the executive lead from the Global Evidence Commission Secretariat, and I'm pleased to co-host today's webinar from Canada alongside our Secretariat's executive lead for the domestic and global priorities, Rudolph Russell Detoy. Rudolph.
Thank you, Jen. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to have all of you with us today. I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items, and then we'll jump right in. So first thing to note is we are recording today's session so that we can share it with other people who weren't able to join. It's just something to take note of. If you experience any technical difficulties at any point, please message Steve Lott in the chat of the webinar. We will also be sharing links throughout the session. You're welcome to share these links on social and engage with us on social channels. You can find us on X at the EvidenceCom handle, as well as LinkedIn. I will also say the Update 2024 report is live. It is on our website, so we'll be sharing that in the chat, and please share that around on socials. Lastly, throughout the session, please make comments, ask questions, and we will take these up for discussion later in the session during a Q&A session. Please, if you can, address your question to a specific panelist, and we'll try to get your question over to them. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jen to introduce our panelists for today.
Great, thanks, Rudolph. So as I do introduce our panelists, please, participants, take a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat. And I'll ask our panelists to unmute yourselves, give a wave, say hello, as I present your name in order of appearance. So first, our co-leads for the Global Evidence Commission, Jeremy Grimshaw.
Hi, everyone. Delighted to be here today.
And John Levis.
All right. Good morning, everybody.
From Veritas Institute, the Executive Director, Laura dos Santos Buera. Hi, Laura.
Bom dia. Hello, everyone.
From the Pan-African Collective for Evidence, the Executive Director, Lawrence Malanza Langer. Hi, Lawrence.
Hi, everyone. Lots of sunny wishes from Johannesburg.
And a double intro because Will Moy, the CEO of Campbell Collaboration, is in the office of the Behavioral Insights team with David Halpern. Hi.
Hello.
And we also will be hearing from Maureen Smith, who co-chairs our Citizen Leadership Group of the Global Evidence Commission, by recording. I'm now going to pass it over to Jeremy, who's going to share how we've structured today's webinar. Jeremy.
Hi, folks. So I'm delighted to see so many people on online just at the moment, and I hope you get a sense from Jen's introductions about sort of we should have a very interesting session with some amazing panelists. So thank everyone for being here, and a special thanks to those of you from the Implementation Council. We now have 76 organizations worldwide supporting us to think about how we promote the work of the Evidence Commission to change the evidence systems around the world. The way this is going to work is in a few minutes I'm going to hand over to John, and he will launch, he will basically sort of introduce the highlights of the Update 2024 that we have and the ways of that we see momentum building. As he introduces each priority, he's going to turn to the panelists and ask them for their insights on what they would like to see to improve and hasten the progress of this implementation priority. Then, before we open the question and answer, John will present what we foresee as breakthrough events taking place in 2024, and these are events that we think that the evidence community has to have a very strong presence in, and so we'd encourage you to take up the call to be in these rooms. And now I'd really like to hand over to John. Before I do that, often when sort of people talk about the Evidence Commission, they sort of congratulate myself and John, and I keep saying I'm just a pretty face. It's actually John and the team at McMaster who really deserves the credit. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to John and enjoy the seminar.
Great. Thank you very much, Jeremy. So we're very excited about where we are going into 2024. We really have a sense of building momentum, and we are absolutely determined that we are going to get across the finish line on a number of key pushes that many of you have been involved in. We feel that momentum is building. I've stolen this phrase from Will Moy, who's on the line, for a step change improvement. And we see that across the board generally in how we use evidence to address societal challenges, but also for each of our 3 implementation priorities. And we're going to be talking about them in turn. The first one up is going to be formalize and strengthen domestic evidence support systems. Some of you know that we produced our original report with the input of 25 commissioners from around the globe back in January of 2022. We then produced an update in January of 2023, and now we're back with a second update in January of 2024, and it really feels like we are getting close to landing some major new initiatives in this space. Jen, if we could go on to the next slide. One of the indications of the building momentum is our implementation council is now at 76 organizational partners. We also have 10 citizen leaders from across the globe. Those partners are drawn from 19 countries in every part of the world, and that doesn't count the countries where regional and global bodies are based. And if you look at some of the examples over on the left-hand side of who those organizational partners, they're like a who's who of the major groups in evidence world, but also the major groups on the demand side for evidence that are trying to give greater attention to evidence in decision making. If we go on to the next slide, we'll move now to what we believe to be signs of building momentum with implementation priority 1, which is, again, how do we provide timely, demand-driven, equity-sensitive support to decision makers? We could have pointed to many reasons why we think that the case for better and more efficient evidence support is needed now more than ever. We zeroed in on 2 examples. One, polycrises, so many challenges facing decision makers at the same time: war spillover, infection outbreaks, disinformation campaigns, many challenges. Also rapidly developing AI, and in this space of evidence, AI can be part of the solution, but done poorly, it can be a very powerful competitor for our efforts to better use evidence in decision making. Second sign of building momentum, we're seeing more and more countries embrace pilots of ultra-rapid evidence support. So finding ways within hours and days to rapidly bring together many forms of existing evidence to directly support advisory and decision-making processes. We're also seeing some countries start to experiment with what we call a general contractor or general builder model. In the past, very often people have presented different forms of evidence on their own as panaceas. If you just spend more on evaluation, or if you just spend more on behavioral and implementation research, or if you just spend more on evidence synthesis, we'll have solutions. But our view is, for any given question, you often need multiple forms of evidence brought together, and sometimes those forms of evidence need to be newly built out using existing assets. And that's where a general contractor or builder who can bring the right trade in at the right time is so positioned for big impacts over timelines of weeks and months. Third sign of building momentum, evidence support mechanisms are increasingly aligned both up to advisory and decision-making processes. So those would be decision-making processes in which government policymakers, system and organizational leaders are involved in, but also out to learning and improvement platforms. So actually influencing teachers, principals of schools, parents in terms of educational outcomes, influencing clinicians and others in health systems. The changes that need to happen on the ground need to be supported by cycles of learning and improvement, and evidence can be a big driver in each step of those learning and improvement cycles. Fourth sign of building momentum, we're starting to see cross-country evidence support collaborations emerge. We're involved in a few of them. One example would be a 5-country collaboration. Each country developing its own evidence support mechanisms, but when questions come in, we can quickly check with our counterparts. Have you had to address this recently? What evidence and insights can you share? And vice versa, we can help them as questions come in. And this makes for a much more efficient process of contextualizing evidence for different jurisdictions very, very rapidly. Fifth type of sign of building momentum, collaborations across forms of evidence. And we're thrilled to see the independent evaluation offices of the 45 UN agencies coming together and starting to talk about how do they foreground evaluation and evidence synthesis? How can we bring synthesis earlier into the policy and program design stage and set ourselves up better for future evaluations? And the final piece, and Laura, who's on the line, is involved in one of the 12 country rapid evidence support system assessments, which are pointing us towards fertile ground, areas of excellence or potential for excellence in a given country, whether it be in a central agency like Treasury, a line department like Social Services, a parliamentary group or legislative body. We can often find areas of excellence or emerging excellence that can be the node from which we believe we can grow even better processes in the future. So those are 6 reasons why we are very excited about where things are moving with implementation priority 1. If we move to the next slide, we've in the update just reproduced a slightly updated version of our description of what an evidence support system is, the demand side, the interface, the supply side, all of the points in green happening in every country or province or city, but also this needs to be joined up to the global evidence architecture, which I'll come back to later. On the next slide, we have a slightly updated version of something that was also in update 2023, the possible ingredients in timely demand-driven equity-sensitive products. So the different forms of evidence from a given jurisdiction coming together in different ways, depending on where we are in a policy or program cycle, then the best evidence from around the globe, including how it varies by groups and contexts, and then other types of information, like what are our typical comparator countries doing in this space, and what have they learned from those experiences, which are often also brought together. And these can now be brought together using these ultra-rapid evidence support mechanisms in hours and days to feed into advisory and decision-making processes. So with that, I'll turn it back to, I believe, Rudolph, who will kick off the conversation among the panelists.
Excellent. Thank you, John. Before I kick it over to the panelists, I'll just check with Jeremy. Did you want to add anything, or is there anything that stands out to you? Okay, great. So we'll start off then with Laura from Brazil. Your reactions to this, when you look at this party, in what ways do you see momentum building? And are there any particular areas where you would like to see more progress happening?
Thank you, everyone. This is so exciting for us because as a member of the Brazilian Coalition for Evidence, we've been actively participating in the rapid evidence support systems assessments, and we've seen so much growth in Brazil. Just last week, updating our RESSA, we understood that we have over 7 government units interested in either creating their own evidence units or strengthening the cross collaboration within governments. So this is super exciting for us. And also we have seen loads of progress regarding this just last slide that John was presenting around other types of information conversing with global evidence for a more localized approach of evidence-informed policymaking, which in Brazil has been amazing, not only for the health sector, but now seeing some progress on human rights, education, and other sectors that were just starting to explore and now have seen this great improvement. And I think in terms of what we would like to see more pace is just we've been working this past year for more regional collaboration in the Latin America and the Caribbean Evidence Hub, and advancing in understanding cross-country priorities and really collaborating on lessons learned across evidence support systems is something we want to delve in 2024.
Great. Thank you, Laura. I'll now pass it over to Lorenz in South Africa. Same questions for you. How do you see the momentum building in your work, and where would you like to see more progress over the course of 2024?
Yeah, no, thanks so much. And I mean, I guess first up, lots of congratulations to the commission. It's yet another really brilliant report. So I hope you all cheers and you can get a bit of rest now, but it's really a lovely update. And also add exactly as Laura was saying, momentum is building. It's a really exciting time to be working in this space. In South Africa in the last 12 months, it's been amazing. I would say momentum is building through partnerships and collaborations in particular. So that's where we're seeing new traction. We have new partners, dare I say, unusual suspects from different sides joining our evidence ecosystem here. And that's largely through what was on the slides, like the fresh winds that AI and digital technologies is bringing to our field. So it's happening here on the ground quite a bit. We've got 4 new grants that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has given around gender and evidence use and AI. So it's a really exciting time and attracts new and different entities that haven't worked in this space before. And that really has allowed us to move quite fast to build some of these silos that you had mentioned on the slide, and that we work in different areas of the evidence ecosystem. Traditionally, for example, in Cape Town, the government had an evidence unit that was structured to one team working on data, the next team working on M&E, and then the next team working on synthesis, and another team on behavioral insights. Well, now we have just one unit that looks at responsive evidence systems across, and I think this is really exciting, and technology has helped a lot there. Where I personally see most tractions in the momentum building, but I think we can still do much more, is around how we integrate youth voices in evidence-informed decision making. So there's now in Africa Evidence Youth League. There's also an Youth Employment Evidence Hub that's just being launched. And that's fantastic because it brings really different perspectives. So oftentimes in these initiatives, we as kind of the oldish people in the system have been shaken up quite a bit. Particularly how we framed the idea of evidence use as a technical exercise, caring a lot about confidence intervals and precise effect sizes. And I think the youth has really brought a perspective on, well, this is a moral case, and this is almost an emotional case. And the use of evidence as a practice and as a value is something we should all deeply care about, whether it's our professional or our personal context. And I think that reframing of evidence use as a social enterprise, like as a really exciting career and field to be in, that has been really enjoyable for us to be shaken. And I think I'm really looking forward in 2024 how momentum is continuing to build there. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Lorenz. With that, I'll pass it back to John to talk about implementation priority 2.
Great. Thanks, Rudolph. And a significant amount of the momentum for this one actually comes from the 2 panelists who you're going to hear from very shortly, and I'll explain why as we go. A number of signs again here of building momentum, in this case, especially for an evolving suite of living evidence syntheses, which we believe will be a game changer for those people who work globally, but also for the many of us who work at the more local level, because we can now, with much greater efficiency, put the best evidence from around the globe alongside the many forms of needed domestic evidence as part of these ultra-rapid evidence responses that we provide. So first sign of building momentum, coalescing sources of cross-sectoral demand for that suite of living evidence syntheses. And there's 2 groups that we're really excited about here. One, the Global SDG Synthesis Coalition, bringing together the 45 independent evaluation offices from across the UN system. Very, very committed to starting to foreground in a much more explicit way living evidence syntheses alongside evaluation to drive the attainment of the societal development goals. Big change to have so many well-positioned actors across the UN system calling for an evolving suite of living evidence syntheses addressing the SDGs. And Will is very, very involved in that work. On the 4 country side, we have David, who is undertaking a piece of work at the request of the Economic and Social Research Council in the UK to explore the possibility of 4 countries coming together and identifying areas of shared policy and program priorities domestically that would be well served, again, by an evolving suite of living evidence syntheses. Those types of collective expressions of demand are absolutely critical. We will do much better when our living evidence syntheses are meeting the needs of people on the demand side, and where they are coming together and investing in a more joined up way rather than the current very, very disaggregated way that has led to a lot of unfortunate duplication across countries. Second sign of things looking even better in 2024, the emergence of cross-sectoral suppliers of living evidence syntheses. So with Will coming into the collaboration, he has spoken very eloquently and written eloquently about the need for a step change improvement in the efficiency with which we produce living evidence syntheses. And Campbell, as the group that works across so many sectors, is very well positioned to contribute to leading the charge in this space. We also have the emergence of Alive, which more functions as a matchmaker in a marketplace where there's interest on the demand side, groups on the supply side who can come together with a shared commitment to maintaining a set of living evidence syntheses. So two key players, one dramatically upping its game, Campbell, one emerging on the scene to complement what Campbell and others are able to do. Third and fourth are on the technology side. So we're in a much better position now to leverage technology to make global evidence much more compelling to folks on the demand side. Imagine being able to say to busy policymakers, to busy frontline implementers, we will have the best evidence at your fingertips. It will be comprehensive. It will always be up to date. You'll be able to come into it by group. That could be by age group or by equity deserving group or some other group. You can come into it by context. So I'm particularly interested in urban schools. I'm particularly interested in schools in inner city areas. But you can also come at it by intervention. A stakeholder group has come in promoting a particular program. What do we know about this? You can come at it from a broad approach, like the Education Endowment Foundation does with its teaching and learning toolkit. Here's what we know about homework. Here's what we know about peer tutoring. Or you can come at it by best buy. If you're trying to move indicators of this type for educational attainment, here are the best investments that you can make. This is potentially revolutionary. People can use it then both directly, but also evidence intermediaries like Lawrence and Laura can then put this global evidence alongside the many forms of domestic evidence that are needed. We're also really well positioned going into 2024 to leverage technology on the supply side, to improve efficiency by introducing in measured ways artificial intelligence to help with the efficiency of workflows, but also to have much more distributed capacity to maintain these living evidence syntheses across the globe. With satellite-based internet technology, with software applications that are now available, many of which have artificial intelligence built into them, we can now have much more distributed capacity for these living evidence syntheses. And one of the many ways these living evidence syntheses will have their impacts is by reducing research waste. So it's both about getting the right evidence into the hands of those who can act on it. It's also by making sure that our research investments go to truly adding value as opposed to duplicative research projects. The fifth sign of building momentum, we're starting to see the emergence of both first movers and visible champions among private and public funders. And 2024 is the year we hope to get a number of them over the finish line, making hopefully collective announcements about how they're going to be working together for major new investments in the global evidence space. And finally, we're starting to see ways into initiatives focused on other aspects of using evidence to address societal challenges. The emergence of the new Francophone Network for Science Advice, which is focusing much more on the demand side. I mentioned already the UN independent evaluation offices, which are so well positioned within the UN system to bring synthesis in alongside evaluation, but also to find ways in to the other parts of the UN system that deal with data, that deal with behavioral and implementation research, that deal with other forms of evidence to support a collective upgrading of the UN system's capacity to bring evidence to bear in its supportive member states. If we go to the next slide, We have a new visual about the global evidence architecture. I'm not going to go through it in detail. We continue to try to figure out, is this the right way to say it? But we've started at the top with what have we learned from around the world and how does it vary by groups and contexts? And that's that evidence available, sliced and diced in a variety of different ways that individuals can just use directly if they want to know what have we learned from around the globe. One step down, we'll have these downloadable data sets. Imagine we get to the day that every study in the world in the education space, the data has been extracted, the risk of bias has been assessed for the study, and evidence intermediaries like Laura and Lawrence can quickly pull in those studies that are relevant to them to create a bespoke contextualized evidence synthesis very relevant to their context. And that then sits on a platform of living evidence syntheses with a variety of processes underneath it, both short-term ones like prioritization, longer-term ones like capacity building. And then all of this, of course, rests on the people and the technology and the emerging incorporation of artificial intelligence. So very open to feedback on this figure. The pink, of course, representing that global architecture, the green making those connections to the advisory and decision-making processes and the learning and improvement processes. So Rudolf, I'll turn it back to you for the questions for our panelists. Thanks.
Great, thank you, John. And Jeremy, I'll just check again with you. Is there anything you'd like to add here? I know there's so much happening in this space. Are there any particular areas that stand out to you?
No, I think the key issue is that we as a community have to come together in a very generous way. This isn't about us trying to get a small part of the existing pie. This is about us making the arguments to grow the pie. And I think particularly investing in those global public goods that support all of us, like organizations like CE, Campbell, Cochrane, like Prospero and the technology platforms. So that's I think it requires us to come together as a community. There is a question in the chat box about AI, which I think we can do during the Q&A, but I think Will would probably be really good to answer that. So that's enough, Rudolf, and I'm afraid I have to drop off just now. But great to see everybody.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Yeah, no, great point. And I think your point is something that we can come back to in the Q&A as well to unpack a bit more, that question around working together, because I know, there are a lot of players in this global evidence space, different funding sources, different interests, but we really need to come together to address this complex issue of evidence use. So thank you, Jeremy. We'll now turn it over to our two panelists who are in the same room conveniently. We'll start off with David. So your reactions to this party, how do you see momentum building the most, and where do you think we need more progress?
Thank you. It's great to be with you guys. So, certainly what I'm focusing on, some of the good news is in a number of countries, you've got some clue of kind of underneath the bonnet, there's a real push for evaluation, which I think is incredibly important. And one of the reasons not only does that drive the production of evidence, it means in key policy communities, you have people who are attuned to what constitutes good evidence. So I just can't underestimate. I think that's it builds the absorptive capacity, right? If you lent into the area, you now can tell the difference between good and bad evidence, and that's very important. It's not very public, but I think it's very important. I'd certainly say UK, Australia would be good examples where it's moving forward with some pace. I'm particularly spending a lot of time, as John introduced very, very well. We've got this with some support from the Economic and Social Research Council to respond to a commission from 4 governments. It would be great if it was more governments, but it's hard to coordinate even in small groups of countries. So US, UK, Canada, Australia, to say, basically building on the work of the commission, well, let's be more specific. What are those specific kind of pieces that look like no-brainers, to use the non-technical sense, but that we should jointly commission, right? Because Will lives and breathes this. Why on earth would several countries commission basically the same systematic review would be an example. Why can we agree together? Here's a list of ones we want to get filled. Let's get them commissioned. Let's get them there for anybody who needs them, hopefully for other countries too. It could go into other assets. Could be the basic API issue, which we all know. You go to a bit of report. Actually, it's reported in different ways. You have to spend a lot of time to scrape it together. It could be some kind of mechanisms where we can more rapidly, maybe Alive will do this, but record that there's common interest in an area and it could be filled. And of course, it also goes to trying to understand, and I'll just conclude really on this, even just go to the fundamentals of where are those gaps. So the commission's been very helpful at giving the broad landscape, but that next level down, there is a general sense there are some areas, well rehearsed around pharmaceuticals and some aspects of health where there is a huge amount of primary research and indeed a huge amount of secondary or synthesis of it, and quite sophisticated consumption of it. There are other areas which are emerging fast, like education, but it's great. But there are lots of areas. But the harder thing in some ways is to map, well, where is that not in place? Some parts of the criminal justice system, on benefits, on even economic growth policy, when you really dig into it, often looks surprisingly weak. And this is actually in many ways a call for help. We found it more difficult than we could even to do that basic gap analysis, partly because the ways in which, even in small groups of countries that we record public spending or research activity, doesn't necessarily align. And so we would like to be able to more systematically fill out that story. Well, what specifically are the areas where there are significant gaps and we should prioritize across at least a small group of countries and hopefully spread? So anyone on this call who has more information on that, or has had a good go at a mapping exercise at next level down, we would love to see it. We certainly don't want to reinvent the wheel. And indeed, maybe one of the conclusions from work itself would just be, even to do the gap analysis itself, there's evidential problems which we're running into, which I think itself is quite a telltale. And on the one hand, we're making progress, but let's also square up to we've got a long way to go. On that positive note, the person who's going to fix it all is, of course, well, amongst others.
Well, it's really important to say, take that bait. Campbell is a global network of hundreds, if not thousands, of researchers. It's been built up over 25 years, and like so much of the encouraging signs in this area, it's about relationships that have been built over time and people in the right positions with the right experience being ready to move. I was inspired to apply to join Campbell by the work of the Evidence Commission and this coming together of people with a real understanding of the gap that causes so much harm downstream. If you don't synthesize evidence effectively, then you can't have those rapid conversations that drive public debate, that drive politics, which is where I've spent my career. And what we're seeing now is the emergence of really exciting conversations about that need and how practically we can fill it. And the challenge on the other side for us as a community of people doing synthesis is to be able to live up to those needs and really deliver on them. And having been in a world for a long time where it's very, very hard to get support for serious evidence synthesis in social science and public policy, in contrast to health, where it's been much better established. If we move into a time when there is a much stronger demand, then we change the way we deliver against that. And John talked about some of the exciting technology opportunities. Part of my background is running an evidence use AI team that, backed by Google, their work now in use on 5 continents. A lot of that opportunity applies in evidence synthesis and needs to be built on urgently. And in the past, there just hasn't been the support to really bring the technology in this space up to the forefront of where it is. But building tech is only part of that process. Training people, deploying it, putting it into useful products, making sure we have the methods and methodology to deliver it. That's all part of the same process. And Campbell Collaboration, as a body that exists to support the evidence synthesis community, is there to facilitate that. And as John mentioned, the emergence of Alive as another body supporting the evidence synthesis community in a slightly different way and bringing together the user and producer sides around specific projects is a really exciting straw in the wind about looking at what are different ways of working that can achieve more for everybody. So everywhere I look, I find exciting people doing exciting work. I just noticed in John's, I think, formidable introduction that it was we will, we can, we are, and then when it came to money, we hope. There is a real fact in this area that it is still hand to mouth at best. There are a lot of organizations that are very precarious, including Campbell Collaboration, and it is absolutely a moment where we could have triumph or disaster in the next year. And the decisions made by these key funders and leaders that John is talking about could transform the evidence environment. That opportunity is on the table, the skills are available, the relationships exist, the people are in the right places. Or we could have this same conversation in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years of why did we not do this and be regretting it. So I am watching this scene with a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of nerves at the same time.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, David, for those open, honest comments. Those are things we really need to think about. Just before I turn it over to John, just a reminder to everybody, please drop your questions in the chat. We will come back to them in the Q&A section. Now over to you, John, for priority number 3.
Thanks. And I'll move a bit more quickly through this, not because it's not equally important, just because I realized that I spoke perhaps a little bit too long about the other priorities and we want to leave time for questions. We also see signs of building momentum with implementation priority 3. So this one, though, as I'll come to in a minute, feels like a particularly challenging implementation priority. So the good news is people are coming together to learn from one another. And so we've tried to, alongside Cochrane and the World Health Organization, create a space where people can share their experiences in what is working and what is not working, and putting evidence at the center of everyday life. We also see greater acknowledgement about the extent of the challenge with citizens being inundated with information, with mis and disinformation, but also greater attention to finding effective ways to counter that mis and disinformation. We're also seeing more appreciation for the strong headwinds that are being faced in this area, and we give a number of examples of what those headwinds are, but also the need to lock arms to make progress against those headwinds. And that then is connected to the 4th and final sign of building momentum, greater recognition that we need to use a collective impact orientation. So a lot of exciting things here, but again, some of them are exciting in the sense of a recognition of the challenges that we're up against and a sense of resolve to try to address those challenges. We then have a visual which is just slightly different from Update 2023, adding in that final pillar of giving citizens a bigger role in system transformations, whether that be education, health, social services, or others. And then underpinning all of this, the importance of developing trusting relationships and finding ways to meaningfully build equity, diversity, and inclusion considerations into all of this work. If we go to the next slide, which I think is the kickoff to the video. Yes, so am I turning it back to you, Jen?
Yeah, I'll take it from here. And we will indeed queue up Maureen Smith. Thanks, Steve, our producer, for doing that. And I'll just say that, given the headwinds are so great, that, like you, John, Maureen wanted to share that the biggest step forward that she thinks we can take is together. Steve, I'll stop sharing so you can queue up that video. Great.
Putting evidence at the center of everyday life has never been more important, and Update 2024 reconfirms our commitment to this priority. We're not doing it alone. Cochrane, the world's largest producer of evidence synthesis and home to the Cochrane Consumer Network, and the World Health Organization's Evidence-Informed Policy Network, EVIPNet, are key partners, each of which has also confirmed that citizens need support. We know the headwinds are strong. There's more information, including growing misinformation and disinformation, than ever before. And that makes the need to help citizens find reliable evidence more important than ever before, too. One of the ways we are committed to helping is creating the space for discussing what works. Specifically, what are citizen leaders and citizen-serving non-governmental organizations doing to liberate the best evidence so everyday people can find it and use it when they need it? What are evidence producers doing to engage citizens in the evidence that's produced? And what are decision makers doing to free up space for citizens to have a seat at the table? The organizations we've already engaged through our global webinar series and in-person events tell us that we need more spaces like this to talk to one another, learn from one another, and collaborate. No one organization can do this alone. And if you're keen to work with us, then we're keen too. Thank you.
Thanks to Maureen. And I'll just say absolute pleasure to have an opportunity to work with her through our citizen leadership group, the Global Evidence Commission. She references the work we're doing with the WHO's EVIPNet and the Cochrane Consumer Network. And I'll just say we have 2 more webinars coming in that 5-part series. So upcoming in February, one on pushing past platitudes. There's a lot of rhetoric about system transformation in many fields, about engaging citizens. This is about real engagement, real everyday citizens who are creating change felt by everyday people. So that's the next one coming up. And I will say the 5th, which is not yet promoted on our website, but will be soon, is a return to a key section from the Evidence Commission's foundational report. And that is on Indigenous rights and ways of knowing, and how do we co-create space in these conversations. And I think in countries that share a settler colonialism context, that it's central. And it really does hit both of those cross-cutting themes that we've now added to our visual on building trust, and also considerations around equity, diversity, and inclusion. Will, I am going to come back to you in just a moment, because nobody knows this fact-checking world and beyond as well as you do, certainly on this call and otherwise. But I'll just say that as someone who spends half my time with the Global Evidence Commission and the other half as a freelance journalist, I think there's a lot that we can do on that side as well. And myself and colleague Carrie Waddell, who's an evidence synthesis lead with the McMaster Health Forum, we recently wrote a piece for the Canadian Journalism Project about how journalists can tap into evidence synthesis to bring more context and understanding. We talked about climate change. We think it has broader relevance. And even when syntheses aren't available, it certainly has helped me be able to ask the types of questions of single studies, and also to make best use of the evidence that we have. So lots more work to do, though the headwinds are strong. Will, I want to come to you, mile markers or where you think we need to make progress in this particular priority area.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it does feel in some ways like the most challenging area because it involves the most people, and that's its beauty. What I've seen in my old work, as Jen said, in fact-checking as part of an international network of fact-checking organizations, we have seen all over the world springing up citizen-led, often journalism-led organizations pushing for the use of evidence, not as an abstract idea, but very practically listening to each speech government leaders give, challenging their media, challenging their politicians. And I think it's really exciting to see that kind of energy, and a really great reminder that in the modern world, it is easier for groups of people to come together who have shared beliefs and shared commitments and get things done together. And I think it's really powerful that the Evidence Commission is looking to tap into that energy and channel that energy and make sure it connects with the places that can make most difference. I think, Laura's work is a really great example of how a citizen focus combined with the right kind of organizational understandings and approach can really make a very big difference. And we've seen that all around the world. My most striking example from the fact-checking world of this was that the Ayatollah Khomeini actually issued a public correction and apology to one of his speeches in Iran after being fact-checked, which I have to say is not a result we achieved in the UK with the head of state. So we were pretty jealous of that. But yeah, there is genuinely a time of citizen power. It's very hard to create, it's very hard to exercise, but serious global institutions that want to make a big difference need to be able to do bottom up as well as top down. And I really respect the Evidence Commission for knowing that and building it in from the beginning.
Fantastic, thanks, Will. John, I'm going to pass back to you for your 4th and final breakthrough events, and also some concluding remarks from this update.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, there are going to be many, many meetings in 2024 that happen at the country, subnational, regional level. We wanted to zero in on 5 high prospect events where we think there's the potential for breakthrough. So the first is the Summit of the Future, bringing together heads of state to talk about the SDG agenda. It is such a unique opportunity to showcase the value of living evidence syntheses and to position that that initiative, the Global SDG Synthesis Coalition, to really push forward towards their vision of evidence driving global agendas like the SDGs in future. It's very hard to find ways into conversations among government leaders and government science advisors. INGSA, the International Network for Government Science Advice, is one powerful way in. And so we have the good fortune to have a panel organized for the meeting in Kigali in May that we hope will open up an opportunity to talk with science advisors about how to speak in a way that makes it much easier to judge their accuracy, and why some of these new developments like living evidence syntheses should be front and center in their toolkit. There are also key conversations on the evidence supply side. We're really excited about Jan Mink's and colleagues' efforts to bring together the modeling community, which has really advanced the science in the climate action space, with the evidence synthesis world, which has historically not been as front and center in that climate solution space. That will be happening in Berlin. Prague will be an opportunity to have evidence synthesis world and guideline world come together to speak across sectors, and we hope that conversation will broaden to include the many other forms of evidence that are needed to drive change in advisory and decision-making processes and learning and improvement processes. And near the end of the year, the evaluation world is coming together, and what a great opportunity to really continue to advance the conversation about how evaluation, synthesis, and other forms of evidence can be used throughout the policy and program cycle, and not just be thought of as a late emerging step in the process. There are many other conversations underway about events, one perhaps focused on living evidence syntheses, hopefully at least one focused on funding, but they're not in a position yet to speak about those. So these are 5 that we know of where we anticipate the potential for breakthroughs. If we go to the next slide, it's just the conclusion slide. We're very interested in working with any groups interested in contributing to these priorities. We have a number of action items for you. If you're in a country that doesn't yet have a rapid evidence support system assessment, contact us. If you want to help out with the global evidence architecture, ask difficult questions of your funders and donors, and encourage them to contact people like David and others who are trying to bring together funders to have this step change investment in living evidence syntheses. Support citizen serving NGOs and citizen leaders in your own country, and think about how we can enable them to make better use of evidence. And as always, we welcome expressions of interest from any of you who are interested in complementing what we're doing. So Jen, I'll turn it back to you for any Q&A.
I'll just say too, John, the breakthrough piece, I mean, we've just made the case that in the final priority, that collaboration is a breakthrough in and of itself, right? And we need it if we're going to tackle those strong headwinds. So, we will share the registration for the next webinar on putting evidence at the center of everyday life. As you said, we've got a chance to take questions. Panelists, if there was anything you also wanted to weigh in on, the breakthrough events ahead, what's upcoming for 2024, just pop on into the conversation.
And there was that early question about AI, which Will may want to venture a response to.
I'm going to go back to that. I think he did start to address it well, but let me just phrase the, So Jennifer Hill asked, what part do you see AI playing in living evidence syntheses in particular? So Will, maybe we could start with you, and John, if you wanted to weigh in as well, or anyone else.
Thanks. It's a great question, and partly the answer is no one knows, because the serious technology development hasn't been funded in this area. So what we have is some experimental work, some really great pioneers in this space, but we don't have the ability to build and test for things that should have been done by now, frankly. The evidence synthesis process is long, laborious, and highly manual, and very talented, skilled people are doing a lot of legwork, not all of which should need to be done by humans. And I think it's really important to put our best people's efforts in the best places, and we're not using technology effectively to do that at the moment. The way I think about living evidence synthesis specifically is there's essentially 2 things. One is using AI to speed up and make simpler and faster and cheaper evidence synthesis. And the other is using open science and open data in evidence synthesis to make things more reusable, more customizable, more repurposable for different audiences, and so on. And when we think about the tech space around evidence synthesis, I think it's really important to think not just about the machine learning, the language models, and the sort of the stuff that comes under the heading of AI, but the wider use of technology to be more effective and to make the most of the people involved in the process. And that is as much about sharing your work in reusable forms and very simple things about data formats as it is about complex cutting-edge AI technologies. And so that's what we want to get into. As I said, this is a field I've worked in before, and I've seen transformative changes as a result of using tech well. But the other thing to say is that the Campbell collaboration is all about high quality evidence synthesis. We absolutely know that over the next few years, there will be people turning up saying, I've got a program and it can summarize all the research in the world for you. And it will not have those quality controls. It will not have the understanding of how biases come into that process. It will not have a commitment to equity. It will not have the methodology and so on. We need to use technology in smart ways to support high quality synthesis rather than get blown away by salespeople, which is very much a risk in the next few years.
Oh, just a quick add on that, by the way, just in addition to the synthesis, I guess we see a potentially big role with respect to the last mile stuff. In terms of the translation, so that the busy policymaker actually at the moment, let's face it, what they do is they call someone up and say, can you tell me what this is? What should I really think about? So that last mile of getting it from the synthesis into what's actually the most usable form for the
and a really interesting example of that, the work I did in my old organization, would make real-time transcripts of what politicians are saying or what a TV news show was saying and automatically annotate it with the evidence and fact checks relevant to what people were saying in real time. And that's been in use, as I say, in 5 continents, lots of different languages, around lots of elections all around the world. That kind of thing is going to become increasingly normal. And the question of who builds it, whether it's built in the public interest and whether it's built to high standards is actually a crucial question for the next decade.
Fantastic. John, anything you wanted to add on that? We do have another question, and Rudolph, I'm going to come back to you because I know we had a few questions too that have come to us as we've been developing Update 2024, one particularly around how organizations or what organizations might need to be involved. And we've had a real conversation in this chat box too about, am I part of the Implementation Council? CEE asked that, and yes, you are, but others may be interested in knowing. But I just want to first go to Ismail's question because he said, and John, I'm going to pose this to you. He says, look, you've gone through the signs for building momentum, but what are the cautionary signs that could derail us? And it's a good point because we built the report around building momentum. We recognize, as you said, because it's such a key learning to understand the challenges against us and putting evidence at the center of everyday life. So, otherwise, what do you see as kind of some of the key risks or cautionary signs that could derail this momentum we are building collectively toward putting evidence to better use?
Jen, do you want to just take the slides down? Barbara suggested that way people can see the faces. So I would say, Ismail, great question. I would say that we point explicitly to the headwinds for implementation priority 3, which is about putting evidence at the center of everyday life. I think the headwinds are quite extraordinarily strong in that space, and we're quite explicit about them in the report. If I then move to implementation priority 2, trying to get to that evolving suite of living evidence syntheses, I think Will, indicated this. The risk is that the funders don't come together and recognize the opportunity here and make a large-scale coordinated investment. And instead, what we end up with are a set of small, competing, highly fragmented investments, and then 3-5 years from now people look back and say, well, that didn't really get us anywhere. So with the leadership of folks like Will and David and others, we really need to try to land a very big unified investment in this space. And I really believe that if we can do it at the right scale, with the right rigor, with the right user orientation, we will have a profound impact on the future demand for evidence. And then in terms of challenges with implementation priority 1. I think David's right about absorptive capacity. The number of people in any given government or large organization or learning and improvement platform who really get evidence and can see the potential of a step change improvement in how evidence is used is vanishingly small, and they can so easily move into different portfolios and then you lose momentum. So those battles need to be fought in every single jurisdiction. How do you find those champions, support them, connect them to other champions, build out more champions so that over time you have this virtuous cycle that I think we've seen in the UK for some time and select other countries, but we do not see in the vast majority of countries.
Just to call it, if I mean, that's such a key question, and I'm sure there are considerations to country context, region. So Laura, Lawrence, David, Will, feel free to come in on this too, in terms of, what you think could derail progress in 2024, or what's sort of top of mind for you.
I can quickly jump in, just because I've witnessed the power of what Lawrence was saying about engaging more of youth leaders, and as John was saying, having new champions, but also having a new generation of evidence producers and people who are expanding the boundaries of this field. I think is critical. All of us are overworked. Everyone who's interested in this topic is engaging multiple projects. So I think one thing that could derail us is not making the room for new people and new faces to jump in and bring their ideas to the table. And I know, of course, the example we have now in the Africa Evidence Network and the Youth League, it's amazing, and we should be watching this carefully and learning from it.
Maybe I just quick, there are a lot of elections in the world this year. And elections are not necessarily the place when actually evidence does come to the fore. In fact, even within government, you often hear remarks like, well, evidence is definitely not the best paid lobbyist in the room, and may not even be in the room at all. So one of the things that's really important, I think, about this entwining, which has been touched on already, and indeed Will has lived, is to try and generate public curiosity and asking smart questions, and including in mediators. So when journalists ask, when someone makes a claim, what is your evidence behind that? And that this become part of the rhythm of life, so that at least some of what happens in elections does have a reference back. And I think, for what it's worth, there are some very relatively light touch things that funders are out there that can do to encourage this. I mean, one we did in the UK a few years ago, which I think is mad not being repeated, which is just literally taking public policy documents and just saying, is there any evidence in them? And what's the level? Do they come from there? It's actually relatively easy to do. And it's quite a potent thing to introduce into the mix. And so similarly, manifestos, other kind of contexts. It won't be top of the line, but at least to get it there would be important.
Yeah. Well, I'd only add, it's remarkable how sensitive, powerful institutions are to people asking questions, but they're not used to being asked. And I think that, we found, and that example David just gave, publish something that says you're not doing something you obviously think you ought to be doing, and suddenly you get this almost emotional reaction from people, which is very powerful. So the lack of scrutiny in this area of relatively simple scrutiny is in its sense an opportunity, because there are small things that can make a big difference.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be neat to know what's the best evidence-based election campaigns are occurring in the world? That'd be a fun project for someone.
I don't think you'd find it very encouraging based on my experience of various countries' elections, but there we go.
Great.
Just maybe to quickly compliment, we've said elections too, and I know out of time, so I think probably not to leave kind of on this depressing issue of headwinds. I think just being together in this room, what the Commission has achieved is amazing, because all these headwinds we can overcome through collaboration, through partnerships. And it's hard to believe that before COVID, we didn't have COVID and we didn't have the Commission. So we didn't have the central body to go to and convene us. And now we do. And I think with that, we can easily overcome some of these headwinds. So thanks a lot for that.
We've got a minute to close, so I just want to reinforce some of to Lawrence's point, what you can do, how you can get involved, because I cued attention to earlier interest in joining the Implementation Council. You know, I think for starters, share this report on social with your colleagues in your next event that you're participating in. Similarly, if you're having events and you know, you're interested in learning more about this, we and the network that we work with are absolutely keen to participate and help liberate some of this so that it makes sense and can be rooted in the work that you do. If you do see yourselves in this work, you know, reach out to us with expressions of interest. We state that clearly in the Global Commission on Evidence. And we very much, I think, are leading from behind on a lot of this because there's so many organizations demonstrating strength and work, but we do want to try to be able to promote and privilege that which is working well and has potential to have seeds elsewhere. We want to say for members of our Implementation Council, who, for those who are prospectively interested in joining, we do meet regularly. Our next meeting is the 15th of February. For the Rapid Evidence Support System assessment leads, our next meetings are on the 20th of February. And just note that these days may be one day ahead for advanced time zones. And I've mentioned previously that for those interested in furthering our third priority, which we really need to be everybody at this point, putting evidence at the center of everyday life, join that next webinar. We have kept a lot of room and space for conversation on those calls and have highlighted evidence-based interventions that are citizen-backed. So I encourage you to join those. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. There's always more to say. Update 2024 is live. Mark those breakthrough events in your calendar, be in the room. And let's keep building momentum toward using evidence to address societal challenges. And that adjourns today's webinar. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much, everybody.